Vladimir Putin had a plan he thought was flawless. He would dismantle the European Union from within, because a military victory against Ukraine's will was impossible. For this, he relied on two men, two political triggermen, Robert Fico in Slovakia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. They were Putin's Trojan horses in Europe, Moscow's veto keys. But that plan collapsed this week, and it collapsed very loudly. Take a good look at the images coming to your screens right now. This is not Moscow, this is not Kiev, this is Bratislava, which Putin considered his friendly territory, his backyard. The people are in the streets, their numbers are in the tens of thousands. In Slovakia, during the week of November 22nd, the people took to the streets against Robert Fico's pro-Russian policies, and the capital, Bratislava, was literally shaken to its core. Fico had threatened, "If you cut off the gas, I'll take you to court." The people gave him their answer in the squares. Look at these images from Bratislava's square. The people's anger is tearing through the night with slogans like, "Moscow dwarf." The situation in Hungary is even more dire. Viktor Orban is panicking. He cannot stop the rise of opposition leader Péter Magyar. Out of desperation, they committed an unprecedented scandal in political history. They leaked the personal data and addresses of 200,000 opponents. These images from Budapest mark the moment Vladimir Putin's European strategy collapsed. Hundreds of thousands of angry Hungarian citizens filled the streets with a cry echoing from the dark days of 69 years ago. "Russians, go home!" Viktor Orbán, Vladimir Putin's most trusted ally, attempted to organize a peace rally on October 23, 2025, with the support of Russian media outlets. But the nightmare Putin faces is not limited to the anger of the Hungarian people. There is one reality Putin fails to grasp. The noose is now tightening around him. Right now, Putin looks down on the US, Europe, and Ukraine. But the reality is, Putin is losing his last bridges to Europe, as Europe stands united in support of Ukraine. Take a look at these images. Putin is now forced to conduct his superpower narrative from underground bunkers where he hides behind camouflage. Because, with Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities so advanced, he doesn't even feel safe in Moscow. Therefore, he can only play at being a superpower from his underground bunker. Yes, there is a meaningless peace plan for Ukraine and a very short deadline. But now Europe is saying enough is enough, even Putin's trusted allies. The Western Bloc, which has become united across the continent, is suffocating the regime in complete isolation by destroying Putin's last diplomatic bridges within Europe. To fully understand these events, we must first step onto the cold and rainy sidewalks of Bratislava. When Robert Fico came to power, he put all his cards on the table to keep his promise to Moscow. His strategy was to scare the Slovak people with an energy crisis, presenting dependence on Russian gas as a national security issue. Fico constantly told his people the fairy tale that, without Russia, we will freeze. Without Russia, we will die. However, this wall of fear collided with the Slovak people's memory of democracy and crumbled during the week of November 22nd. The spark that ignited the events was Fico's reckless threats against the European Union, and consequently his own allies, which violated diplomatic norms. When Fico stood in front of the cameras and defiantly told Brussels, "You cannot cut off Russian gas. If you do, I will take the EU to court. I will sue you." He did not realize that he was actually declaring war, not on Brussels, but on his own people. This statement was the last straw. The Slovak people saw that their leaders were defending the Kremlin's agenda, not Bratislava's interests. Fico spoke not like the Prime Minister of Slovakia, but like the regional manager of Gazprom, and the response came on November 17th, the anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, like a historic slap in the face. Fico thought he could suppress the protests with police force and repression. But the protesters developed a brilliant, non-violent method that left the regime helpless: the chalk revolution. They had no weapons, no stones, only colored chalk. The streets of Bratislava became a manifesto that the police barricades couldn't stop, one that the entire city read until the rain came. The words written in chalk on the sidewalks cornered Fico. According to Euractiv's report from the field, these actions forced Fico onto the defensive and ended his dominance in the streets. The symbolism of this action is immense. Fico can censor the media, he can silence the television stations, but he cannot remove the sidewalks. By writing Fico to Moscow, the people showed their prime minister the route he should take. These slogans echoed not only in the capital, but throughout the country. Everywhere Fico's name appeared had now become a billboard demanding his resignation. Although Kremlin media tried to portray these protests as small, marginal groups, international agencies reported the truth to the whole world. The numbers don't lie. According to data verified by AP News, more than 50,000 people gathered in Bratislava on November 17th. This is a huge number for a small country like Slovakia. Proportional to the population, this is a popular uprising. Not only the capital, but also the industrial cities, considered Fico's strongholds, where the working class is concentrated, rebelled. Reuters reported that even in the eastern city of Košice, 20,000 people took to the streets. This data was enough to debunk Fico's lie that the people support me, only the elites in the capital oppose me. 20,000 people in Košice is a political death sentence for Fico. The most chilling moment of the protests was when thousands of people simultaneously took keys out of their pockets, raised them in the air, and jingled them. This gesture has historical significance. In 1989, as the communist regime collapsed in Czechoslovakia, the people did this to tell party leaders, "It's time, take your keys and go home." Today, in 2025, the fact that Slovak students in Poprad are doing the same thing to Fico shows that they have branded him as a dark figure from the past. According to Medzia's analysis, this action has ended Fico's claim to be the leader of the future. He is now, in the eyes of the people, a Soviet relic that should be consigned to the dustbin of history. The Slovak people's humor is as sharp as their anger. The banners rising among the crowds reading, "Fico, Rostov is calling," summed up where things had come to. Rostov is the Russian city where Ukraine's ousted leader Yanukovych fled and took refuge. The people are clearly telling Fico, "You'll end up like Yanukovych, pack your bags." It is no coincidence that the Washington Post has described these protests as the spirit of the Velvet Revolution. Slovakia has proclaimed to the world that it would rather freeze than bow to Putin's energy blackmail, choosing freedom over comfort. Once dominoes start falling, they know no bounds. The fire burning in Slovakia crossed the Danube River and jumped to Putin's real stronghold in Europe, Viktor Orban's Hungary. Orban had been instilling fear in both Brussels and his own people with the image of an untouchable leader he had built up over the years. However, the events of the week of November 22nd showed how fragile this image was. The crisis in Hungary was not limited to street protests, as it was in Slovakia. Triggered by the regime's panic, it turned into a criminal case orchestrated by the state. Faced with the upcoming elections and the unstoppable rise of opposition leader Péter Magyar, the Orban regime lost control. The panicked ruling media illegally obtained and published the names, addresses, and personal data of more than 200,000 opposition supporters. This is an unprecedented surveillance scandal in Hungarian history. This scandal, uncovered by journalist Pányi Szabolcs, caused an earthquake in Hungarian politics. The aim was to intimidate the public. It was a message saying, "We are watching you, we know who you are." However, this move backfired. Instead of hiding in their homes, people flocked to the rally held in the city of Győr. Péter Magyar defied Orbán's empire of fear in front of tens of thousands of people, saying, "We are the majority, and we are not afraid." Orbán's panic led to fatal inconsistencies not only in domestic politics, but also in his international rhetoric. For years, the Hungarian Prime Minister had been telling his people the fairy tale that Russia is very powerful, and if we don't get along with them, they will crush us. However, in an interview with Axel Springer CEO Matthias Döpfner, he undermined his own propaganda. It's absurd for Russia to attack NATO because Russia isn't strong enough. We are much stronger. This admission shows that Orbán is not a strategic genius, but a politician in a tight spot. So, if Russia is weak, Mr. Orbán, Why is he selling Hungary's honor to Putin? Why is he exhausting himself to veto the EU's €50 billion aid package to Ukraine? Orban's veto threat is no longer a show of strength, but a cry of helplessness. Orban's contradiction has given the domestic opposition a huge advantage. Viktor Orban's nightmare was not limited to the home front. Outside, especially on the other side of the Atlantic, he was facing the strategic impasse he had created. The paradox was this. Orban had been trying for months to market Donald Trump, whom he saw as his ideological ally and friend, as the only leader who understood Putin and could bring peace to Ukraine. According to information reported by Reuters, there were even plans for an ambitious Budapest peace summit that would bring Trump, Putin, and Zelensky together. Orban hoped to see Trump's victory as a personal triumph in his battle against Brussels. However, this image of ideological friendship clashed with harsh economic realities, and most importantly, with the friction created by Orban's own strategies with Putin. In the US, the America First approach, regardless of who is in power, puts Washington's own security and economic priorities at the center. Secondary sanctions in energy and financial channels are well-known tools of this set of priorities. The problem was not Trump's personal animosity toward Orban. The problem was that Orban's high dependence on Russian energy flows created serious friction with the EU and NATO over the Ukraine issue. As Politico Pro also analyzed, when the Trump administration increased economic pressure on Russia, the target of these sanctions inevitably included the Hungarian economy, which continued to do business with these companies. This situation triggered Orban's panic. According to leaked analyses and behind-the-scenes comments, Orban was forced to rush to Washington and personally ask Trump for an exemption from these sanctions due to their potential to devastate the Hungarian economy. This showed how the rhetoric of ideological friendship evaporated in the face of the economic impasse created by Putin. Washington's position was complex. The US administration was signaling that it could show flexibility in areas such as energy sanctions if Orban's government moved toward more visible coordination with EU and NATO policies. In short, the trigger for the tension was not Trump's desire for punishment, but the strategic friction created by the policies pursued by Orban and Putin themselves. For Putin, this was one of the worst-case scenarios. His only ally in the EU, Orban, now needed the approval of the US president to survive economically, precisely because of Putin's policies. Washington could demand that Hungary lift its veto on EU aid to Ukraine as the price of an exception. Putin's Trojan horse had fallen into a trap of its own making. Outside, especially on the other side of the Atlantic, he was facing the strategic impasse he had created. The paradox was this. Orban had been trying for months to market Donald Trump, whom he saw as his ideological ally and friend, as the only leader who understood Putin and could bring peace to Ukraine. According to information reported by Reuters, there were even plans for an ambitious Budapest peace summit that would bring Trump, Putin, and Zelensky together. Orban hoped to see Trump's victory as a personal triumph in his battle against Brussels. However, this image of ideological friendship clashed with harsh economic realities, and most importantly, with the friction created by Orban's own strategies with Putin. In the US, the America First approach, regardless of who is in power, puts Washington's own security and economic priorities at the center. Secondary sanctions in energy and financial channels are well-known tools of this set of priorities. The problem was not Trump's personal animosity toward Orban. The problem was that Orban's high dependence on Russian energy flows created serious friction with the EU and NATO over the Ukraine issue. As Politico Pro also analyzed, when the Trump administration increased economic pressure on Russia, the target of these sanctions inevitably included the Hungarian economy, which continued to do business with these companies. This situation triggered Orban's panic. According to leaked analyses and behind-the-scenes comments, Orban was forced to rush to Washington and personally ask Trump for an exemption from these sanctions due to their potential to devastate the Hungarian economy. This showed how the rhetoric of ideological friendship evaporated in the face of the economic impasse created by Putin. Washington's position was complex. The US administration was signaling that it could show flexibility in areas such as energy sanctions if Orban's government moved toward more visible coordination with EU and NATO policies. In short, the trigger for the tension was not Trump's desire for punishment, but the strategic friction created by the policies pursued by Orban and Putin themselves. For Putin, this was one of the worst-case scenarios. His only ally in the EU, Orban, now needed the approval of the US president to survive economically, precisely because of Putin's policies. Even the temporary sanctions exemption he received from the US after his meeting with Trump was not enough to save him. Because the problem was no longer in Washington, but on the streets of Budapest, the people realized that their leaders were lying, dragging the country into an authoritarian regime under the pretext of a Russian threat. The chalk writings in Bratislava and the data lists in Budapest may seem like local political crises at first glance. When we focus on the bigger picture, we see that these street movements have actually created a tactical nuclear strike effect, reduced to Moscow's geopolitical strategy with coordinates determined by the people. Putin's European strategy was based on blocking NATO and EU decisions through Fico and Orban. However, these two leaders are currently in no position to pound their fists on the table in Brussels. Fico, called upon to resign by 50,000 people in his own capital, lacks the political capital to defend Putin at an international summit. Orban, grappling with a data scandal, is more dependent than ever on EU funds. This situation means the barriers to arms and financial aid flowing to Ukraine are being dismantled. Even if states are inadequate against Russia's disinformation and blackmail, the resistance of the civilian population forms the strongest line of defense. The simultaneous protests organized by the Czechs and Slovaks in Prague and Bratislava show that a civil wall is being built against Russia in Central Europe. This cross-border solidarity is the failure of Putin's divide and rule strategy. The people have learned through experience that rapprochement with Russia brings not prosperity, but corruption and oppression. Although Russia is trying to keep the war on Ukrainian soil, the political cost of the war is now hitting Moscow's allies. Fico and Orban have gone from being leaders rewarded for their closeness to Putin to leaders punished for this closeness, whose seats are now shaking. This is a deterrent lesson for other potential pro-Russian leaders. If you do business with Putin, you fight your own people. The conclusion reached in light of all this data is clear. Vladimir Putin's project to divide Europe failed on the sidewalks of Bratislava before it even reached the trenches of Donbass. Fico's threats are empty. Orban's lists are invalid. The winner is that simple truth written in chalk on the asphalt. Democracy is not for sale, and the peoples of Europe will not bow to Putin's energy blackmail. From the trenches in Kiev to the squares in Bratislava, the message is the same. The Russian world is collapsing. Fico and Orban are not the breakwaters that will stop Putin's fall. They are the first stones to be swept away by that wave of collapse. Will these popular movements force Fico and Orban into early elections and usher in a new era in Europe? Or will these leaders, bolstered by support from Putin, increase the pressure even further? What are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.